Kamala Harris stands out as a significant figure in contemporary American politics, the first female vice president of the United States and the first person of South Asian descent to assume the same. At the same time, her ascension has not been without strong scrutiny, particularly of her ancestry and how to maintain authenticity in the political drama. This is a research into Kamala Harris's family history, the narrative she provides to voters, and the claims which have been made against her authenticity. We are going to delve into the subtleties of her heritage, from her father's Irish Indian roots to the life in Canada from her mother, while also delving into how her narrative emerges in her political life and past. Kamala Harris's ancestry is rich and complex, forming a tapestry full of cultural heritage. Her father, Donald Harris, hails from Jamaica, of mixed Indian and Irish origin. He moved to the United States to further his education, eventually graduating in economics. Through this lineage, Donald traces back to the Irish roots of his ancestors who came to Jamaica, which had been part of England, from Ireland. Significantly, he has revealed that his line leads back to Hamilton Brown, an Irish slave owner of high prominence in the colonial history of Jamaica. This interlinks Harris's family story through the tracks of a slave owner and raises complex facets to the diverse and often painful histories that intertwine in her identity. The family background is uniquely generative from its blend of cultures, but Harris has often posited more simplified storylines to appeal to her political base. Critics argue that this oversimplification is part of a larger trend in partial truth-telling. Commentator Candace Owens, while investigating, has pointed out that Kamala tends to emphasize her so-called African-American heritage, but glosses over the complications surrounding her Jamaican roots. In this regard, Owens argues that such selective emphasis is a strategic move to connect more closely with voters, particularly during her presidential campaign, and to construct a relatable narrative aimed at engaging her target audience. More recently, Donald Harris has publicly weighed in on the nature of his ancestry, touting a rich multicultural heritage of which he is proud. He is often quoted as saying that one needs to expose the various identities. In this case, his Jamaican reality is linked with those from India as well as Ireland. Conversely, such depth is seldom represented in Kamala Harris's political speeches, raising questions about the authenticity of her narrative. The Indian-Irish ancestry of her father tends to get very little foregrounding in the narrative. While her father is of Indian-Irish descent, this aspect is mostly kept in the background and not probed throughout her identity development. Donald Harris is quite open about his history and those of his family members. However, these facts rarely find mention in Kamala's political speeches or public presentations. By downplaying these aspects of her heritage, she risks alienating segments of the electorate who might otherwise appreciate a much more complex narrative that captures the richness of her background. This sort of selective storytelling raises important questions about authenticity and how far politicians will go to create an image that voters can relate to. In fact, it is this duality of her father's heritage, being both Indian and Irish, that could have contributed to a much better understanding of Kamala Harris. However, when the narrative often narrows down to her Jamaican heritage, the subtlety and complexity of her family's past are lost. This loss is significant, not only in terms of how voters perceive her, but also illustrates the dilemmas that anyone of multiracial background faces in the political sphere while attempting to articulate an integrated identity without sacrificing their rich heritage. By choosing to focus on certain features of her heritage while downplaying others, Harris balances on a tightrope that reflects her broader dynamics of identity politics. Her paternal ancestry, and the issues surrounding his connection to historical narratives, specifically the association with colonialism, deserve more than a passing mention. These intricacies are fundamental to the racial identification that she embodies. Recent controversies have emerged regarding Kamala Harris's portrayal of her family history. In her family book, there are photoshopped images presented as slaves, raising concerns about the accuracy of her narrative. This approach risks diminishing the real experiences of those affected by slavery and colonialism. Critics argue that by blending her family's history with broader narratives of systemic oppression, Harris might compromise the authenticity of her personal story for political purposes. Additionally, her use of a distinct accent at rallies with predominantly Indian and Irish audiences has drawn attention.
Listen, the reality also is this. Any policy that will benefit black people will benefit all of society. Let's be clear about that. Let's really be clear about that. So I'm not going to sit here and say I'm going to do something that's only going to benefit black people. No, because whatever benefits that black family will benefit that community and society as a whole and the country.
While this could be an attempt to connect more closely with her supporters, some view it as potentially inauthentic. There are concerns that these actions might be perceived as a strategic ploy rather than a reflection of her true identity, leading to trust issues among voters. Lastly, Harris's selective choice of conducting interviews primarily with African American media personalities has raised questions. This has led to speculation that she may be curating her public image to align with certain demographics, potentially alienating others in the process. Her mother, Shyamala Gopalan, was equally interesting. In origin from Indian Tamil culture, Shyamala Gopalan hails from Chennai, India, where she migrated from to the United States for her education and received her PhD in endocrinology. Afterwards, she developed an excellent academic career as a notable cancer researcher. The fact that the mother of Kamala Harris originated from Indian Tamil culture is integral to her identity, but it is dominated by her very own claims about herself as an African American while addressing her political base in the US. This is a story of the Indian diaspora to the US by Shyamala Gopalan, but the not quite told part about it, however, is her time spent in Canada. Kamala Harris was a toddler when her parents split up and Shyamala decided to move out with her daughters to Montreal, Canada. This stage of Kamala's upbringing deeply impacted her childhood. She grew up in a predominantly French-speaking city with unique cultural and racial dynamics. So at this time, Kamala moved to Canada and had to negotiate high schools as a biracial child in a multicultural city that, though not without its social challenges, was better prepared for diversity. Her mother was respected in the medical field and helped instill Kamala's independence and sense of social justice. It is interesting, though, that Kamala doesn't speak much about her time in Canada, even though this must have provided her with a broad worldview. What Candace Owens discovers in her research is that this specific omission suggests Harris would wish to dismiss her Canadian upbringing because that would spoil the narrative. She is descendant of African American slaves and grew up within the US, according to Owens. Kamala's life in Canada presented to her an experience different from that which might neatly fit with the identity politics often used during her campaigns. And then there is Owens. Her comments got some heavy hitters on the right, such as Tucker Carlson and political commentator Ben Shapiro, agreeing that much of what Harris has cultivated for politics to surround her personal narrative is questionable. At one point, Shapiro said Harris's background on her mother's side makes her not so simply an African American woman born and raised in the United States. In fact, Carlson has pointed out on his show that Harris has avoided discussing her Canadian years in public forums, suggesting that it doesn't fit the image that she would want to project. It would also be fruitful to note here that Shyamala Gopalan was an active participant in civil rights movements of both the US and Canada. While Kamala often talks about her mother's activism in the context of the US, not much is made about what she contributed to the civil rights discourse in Canada. This, therefore, further feeds into the idea that some aspects of her background are being selectively shared. As Owens keenly observes, this selective storytelling forces one to ponder how much of Harris's heritage is being rewritten in order to conform to the political narrative she decides to advance. Indian heritage appears relegated to the back burner as a more politically advantageous African American identity is carved out for herself on the campaign trail. So also, her mother's time in Canada is rarely featured, not even once, even though it spearheaded who Kamala Harris is. Kamala's experience in Canada also, for the first time, gave her a unique angle on cultural diversity and multiculturalism. Growing up in a country that boasts of inclusiveness and acceptance, she saw firsthand the manner in which different communities could coexist and thrive together. This experience, no doubt, must have helped her understand social justice and equality, themes she claims to emphasize often in her political rhetoric. Harris has reflected on interviews about the values instilled in her by her mother, values that include resiliency, hard work, and a commitment to social justice. These have been guiding factors throughout her political career, though they have set the tone on several issues from criminal justice reform as well as access to healthcare. The context of this upbringing, especially from the years spent in Canada, is a very underexplored chapter in this narrative. This further scrutiny raises broader questions about representation and authenticity in politics. Political analyst Molly Jong-Fast argues that, while Harris's stories of her upbringing are inspiring, they gloss too light over more difficult aspects of her experiences, leaving a disconnect between public image and the deeper Kamala Harris combines many different aspects of heritage: Indian, Jamaican, and Irish. At the same time, her political story often incorporates an important role for her African American identity, and authenticity and representation become Democratic criticisms. As she weaves together the complexities of her ancestry, Harris faces the challenge of articulating a compelling story that honors all pieces of her heritage. This journey in her family history becomes a reminder that authenticity is increasingly an important consideration in Democratic politics. Voters want to see politicians who can articulate their real experiences. Ultimately, it goes far beyond just a tale of personal triumph to define who Kamala Harris is, but rather the very complexities of identity in America. As the daughter of immigrants and a key figure in politics, she embodies the multifaceted nature of the American narrative. How she decides to weave her diverse heritage into her public persona shall always continue to shape perception and impact her legacy as a leader in this continually evolving landscape of politics.